So we're going to skip questions till the end, just because we're trying to move through. I'm going to let Garrett take over on the history side, and yeah.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Garrett here, current steering committee co-chair for Green Party, and I'm here to tell you about a little bit of the history of the Green Party real fast. So I just realized I don't have the button to advance the slide, so you're going to have to do that, Chris. Sorry. So the Green Party's history is somewhat complex. So to kind of simplify it, after World War II, folks came home from the war, and there was the whole big boom as being the one of the world's superpowers, powered by effects of the New Deal and things like that, right? And you started to see more domestic movements for change, for civil rights, for environmentalism, for feminism, and for peace. That as the Cold War started to take over, right, there were movements for peace against all the wars. And so, this, of course, came out in the 1960s in particular, when all of these movements, really became big nationwide movements. And you saw marches on Washington and, activists, sitting in and taking over nuclear sites to prevent nuclear things, and, anti-war marches and all kinds of stuff. And all of these movements had a fairly large impact and influence on the government at the time, and they actually won a lot of these battles. We got some civil rights legislation passed. The Vietnam War wound down. Nuclear plants weren't allowed to expand beyond a certain point, and so there were some victories, and this was all good. But the problem was, when all these victories occurred, part of the victories were assumed that you could push for more things within the Democratic Party. So all of these movements became co-opted. They became pulled into the Democratic Party and kind of synthesized in with the Democratic Party as it existed. So once that happened, the change stopped. You didn't see any of these movements pushing for things anymore, because they all were stuck within the machinery of the Democratic Party, which is what it's designed to do. It's designed to co-opt movements and prevent the U.S. from moving more toward the left, more towards socialist policies. So after seeing the effects of this, after the 60s and 70s, folks started to come together in the 80s and say, clearly we need more independent movements again in order to build popular power and popular struggle, in order to start winning on these issues again. Because the Democratic Party is slowing us down. We have to do it outside of the Democratic Party. We have to build popular struggle. And so that was really where you saw the birth of the discussion of the Green Party, where veterans from the civil rights movement and the feminist movement and environmental movement and peace movement came together and started talking about how can we build an independent party for change, to build our own power. And those organizations started to hold meetings where those different organizations, would send representatives, and they would talk about, what would a hypothetical Green Party look like? And so they started to do this in the early 1980s. And if you fast forward a little bit, it eventually coalesced into the first Green Party in the early 1990s, which was formed as what would you call, like a leftist green? Maybe today we would call it a socialist green sort of program that was focused on education and organizing primarily. Educating the general public about green socialist stances, and then organizing in our local communities, yes, to run candidates, but also to grow that activist movement again that we saw in like the 1960s, for example, so that we can have more, build up for bigger system-wide change. And, that idea caught on with a lot of interest. Folks came into the Green Party, built up Green Parties within their local communities and their states through the 90s. And that led up to the idea of like, well, what if the Green Party puts forward somebody to run for president? And so the idea was to throw Ralph Nader out to run for president, and he did in 1996 and then again in 2000. And Ralph Nader got so much attention, and people probably kind of forget, and especially if you're youth, you may not have even seen this, but you can find it on YouTube. The videos of Ralph Nader's runs for president. He was like Bernie Sanders. He was pulling in like huge crowds that were filling stadiums and things like that. So this was, a really interesting moment that really built up and solidified today's Green Party. So from those activist roots from those organizing roots, and then the Nader campaign bringing in more activists and campaigners and candidates and stuff, we saw the Green Party of the United States officially formed around the year 2000 as a national party. So that's, I think, kind of the lead up to where we're at today. So next slide, please. Yeah. So just as a reminder, because of these different roots, the Green Party is both an activist organization and an electoral party. We run people for office, but we also organize our communities for activism, for advocacy, and directly make demands and change within our communities. So we use multiple strategies that we'll get to in order to build up a green socialist world.